right, perfect. Good afternoon and welcome to NCIA's Industry Essentials Educational Webinar Series, our premier digital platform providing timely, engaging, and essential education when and where you need it most. My name is Brian Gilbert, the events manager here at NCIA, and I'm very excited to welcome you all into another edition of our ongoing NCIA Committee Insights series, this time being hosted by our Scientific Advisory Committee. If you're one of the people that just joined, please be aware we'll be conducting Q&A at the conclusion of the presentation. So please pose any questions to the board by pressing the Q&A button at the bottom toolbar. You can stop on into that Q&A area throughout the session, engage with our panelists in real time. And even if you don't have any questions, we'd love for you to contribute to the conversation by giving any upvotes to questions that are particularly worthwhile and sending them to the top of the feed. Now, let's dive into today's session. This afternoon, members from NCIA's Scientific Advisory Committee and leaders from relevant standards development organizations will give updates on the work being done in their specific cannabis working groups. They will also explain how their work complements NCIA and how you can get involved. This session is entitled, "What are standard development organizations and how will they shape federal and global cannabis policy?" It's sponsored by the GMP Collective, so a huge shout out and a special thank you to them for helping coordinate this session. With that, I want to turn it over to Elena Rodriguez, the Managing Director at RM3 Labs, as well as the outgoing Chair of NCIA's Scientific Advisory Committee to moderate and introduce the panelists. You've got the room, Elena, take it away.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you all for joining us here today. We're going to be talking about standards development organizations and how they'll shape cannabis quality and public health. I'm the Managing Director at RM3 Labs. RM3 Labs has been a leader in providing scientific analysis for the cannabis community of Colorado since 2009. We are also members of ASTM's Committee D37 on Cannabis and AOAC's Cannabis Analytical Science Program, both of which you'll learn more about today. And I'm honored to introduce the three panelists we have here today, all of which are leaders in the creation of standards. First, I'd like to introduce Bob Morgan. Bob Morgan is the Director of Technical Committee Operations, where he is responsible for the operations that support 40 technical committees in developing voluntary consensus standards. He has a bachelor's degree in geoenvironmental science from Shippensburg University and has spent over 38 years working for ASTM International. Bob is directly involved with ASTM's Committee D37 on Cannabis, which consists of 800 members representing 26 countries. In ASTM's Committee D37, Bob provides standards development resources for the development of standard guides, practices, test methods, and specifications in an open and transparent process, ensuring that all points of view are considered. Next, I'd like to introduce Scott Coates. Scott is the Senior Director of the AOAC Research Institute, where he's responsible for the daily management of and business development for the AOAC Research Institute. He holds a BS in microbiology and an MS in biotechnology management from the University of Maryland. Scott also serves as the program lead for the Cannabis Analytical Science Program, also known as CASP, which was set up in 2019 to serve the analytical cannabis community and create programs that will support quality measurements. But last but not least, we have Nandu Sarma. Dr. Nandu Sarma is the Director of the Dietary Supplements and Herbal Medicines Program at the US Pharmacopeia, where he is responsible for strategy and external stakeholder engagement for new and innovative projects, working with global stakeholders and expert volunteers in the development of quality standards for dietary supplements and herbal medicines. He holds a pharmacist degree and a PhD in pharmaceutical sciences from Banaras Hindu University in India. Before joining USP in 2006, he was a postdoctoral fellow at the National Cancer Institute, Bethesda, and Thomas Jefferson University, Philadelphia, and was also a senior scientific officer at the Himalaya Drug Company in India. His research experience in the field of dietary supplements includes isolation and analysis of active components of plant materials and their biologic activity. And he has published more than 25 scientific articles in peer-reviewed journals. So without further ado, we're going to start our presentation, starting with Dr. Nandu.
Good afternoon. This is Nandu Sarma. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. I thank the organizers for providing this forum for the USP, AOAC, and the ASTM to provide our perspectives. I will introduce USP in my talk. I will introduce USP as to who we are, how we work, what we observed as a public health need for the cannabis quality standards, the work of USP Cannabis Expert Panel on quality specifications for the cannabis, flower, and the ongoing work at USP. USP is a scientific nonprofit organization with a mission to improve global health through public standards and related programs. USP develops standards for the medicines, dietary supplements, and foods based on expert advice from medical and scientific community. USP standards are enforced by FDA in the United States and recognized in the regulations of 39 countries and utilized in over 140 countries. Next slide, please. And thank you. So the three branches of the USP governance include the USP Convention, which consists of more than 460 voting members from different organizations from 39 countries. These member organizations work with USP to address the shared priorities and protect public health. The convention elects the USP Board of Trustees, Council of Experts, and sets resolutions for USP to work. In 2020, when we are celebrating the USP 200-year anniversary, the convention approved a resolution number 10 to provide mandate to the USP to work on the cannabis quality standards. The Board of Trustees consists of the volunteers elected by the convention and holds the responsibility for the oversight of USP. USP Council of Experts and the expert committees consist of volunteer experts with balanced representation of the subject matter experts from academia, industry, and regulatory agencies. The expert committee makes decisions on standard setting activities and assisted by expert panels, which are advisory. And in case of the cannabis, it is a cannabis expert panel, which provided the input for the expert committee. The next slide, please. So what sets USP apart as a standard setting organization? Unlike most other pharmacopoeia in the world, USP is an independent science-based organization that provides credible, unbiased information and recommendations based on scientific data. USP provides a forum for convening volunteer experts to set standards in a transparent process based on strict conflict of interest provisions. USP technical leadership in analytical areas and related areas is key to provide a holistic approach to quality and safety in the medicines to food spectrum in order to ensure and improve public health. Next slide, please. USP produces a series of public standards which are codified in different compendia. The USPNF, which are the official compendia recognized in the federal laws, as represented by the red book here, also in the digital format on the left. It includes the quality monographs for the botanical drugs, besides several other quality standards, such as the small molecules, biologics, and so on. And it also includes some monographs for the drugs that might be of interest for this group, such as the drug monograph for dronabinol. USP also publishes the FCC and the USP dictionary and the dietary supplement compendium, which is the green book, and the herbal medicine compendium. So both the DSC and HMC are available only in the electronic format now. So the books are disappearing very fast. USP also provides reference standards, which are highly characterized materials. I will talk a little bit more about it in the next few slides. Next slide, please. About the public health rationale for the quality attributes for the cannabis, what we observed is that in light of the permitted use of the cannabis for medical purposes in majority of the US states and in many countries around the world, and the known quality issues with the cannabis and the ongoing clinical research in this area, there is a need for the healthcare professionals, research community, and perhaps most importantly for the patients and the public, the increased quality control of cannabis will benefit the research and their utilization. Information on the quality attributes of the materials in terms of the identity, composition, and purity, and the scientific resources to test these can help prevent patient harm resulting from exposure to substandard, contaminated, or adulterated cannabis products. Next slide, please. So the availability of the cannabis and its constituents prepared according to consistent manufacturing practices will increase the reproducibility and applicability of the preclinical and clinical data. It provides a basis for the regulators and other concerned to use reliable, well-developed, scientifically sound methods. Yesterday, FDA published draft guidance on the quality considerations for clinical research on cannabis and cannabis-derived compounds. The guidance describes the need for use of validated analytical methods and refers to analytical methods and limits in several of the USP journal chapters related to botanical identification, control of the microbial load, and limits of elemental contaminants. The draft guidance also refers to USP information on container closure systems and the rounding rules. We published recently the work of the Cannabis Expert Panel in a journal. And in our publication, we described additional information from USP to control the quality. I will describe that. The next slide, please. So about the quality attributes for the cannabis, in recognition of the fact that the US federal government, including the FDA, does not recognize cannabis as a legal drug product, USP has decided not to create a formal compendial standard at this time. So we did not provide a monograph in the USPNF. As an alternative, USP has opted to publish the findings of its experts in the form of a scientific paper in the Journal of Natural Products, the paper that you see on the screen, rather than a conventional USP monograph, while still employing a rigorous process similar to the one typically used by USP to formulate its quality standards. The recommendations of the Cannabis Expert Panel provide scientifically valid methods, acceptance criteria, and reference standards that are collaboratively tested to establish identification, quantitation of the cannabinoids and terpenes, and limits on contaminants. The paper also refers to several of the AOAC and ASTM guidelines as appropriate in several instances. The next slide, please. So this is an illustration of the morphological, macroscopic, and the microscopic features for the identification of the cannabis flower as presented in the paper and its supplementary information. Next slide, please. We also provided an orthogonal test for the identification as a HPTLC method with well-defined acceptance criteria to differentiate the THC dominant, CBD dominant varieties and the intermediate varieties with appropriate separation of the major cannabinoids which are of clinical relevance. Next slide, please. The publication provides HPLC and GC methods to help ensure separation of the measured cannabinoids and quantitate the cannabinoids of clinical relevance. Next slide, please. USP reference standards are provided for this specific work, and these reference standards are thoroughly characterized materials which are evaluated for fit for purpose use in the recommended analytical procedures. Besides the reference standards for the THC and CBD, USP provides two unique mixtures of the cannabinoids, a mixture of the acidic cannabinoids as well as a mixture of non-carboxylated cannabinoids in different solvents based on our stability data. Next slide, please. The expert panel deliberated a lot about the nomenclature of the cannabis, which is a complex botanical, and depending on several cultivation conditions and the varieties, it produces different chemical profile. So in order to differentiate them, the expert panel has provided for three different classifications systems: the THC dominant chemotype, CBD dominant chemotype, and the THC CBD intermediate chemotype. The objective is to help appropriate labeling of the cannabis based on the THC and the CBD profiles. Next slide, please. A gas chromatographic method is also provided in the publication for terpene analysis with appropriate labeling recommendation for dominant and codominant terpenes based on analysis of large data. Next slide, please. There was a lot of discussion on the contaminants. I'm just brushing through the information because of the paucity of time. A lot of information is in the publication, including the rationale for the proposed recommended levels and the approaches. And the paper describes the limits for the contaminants, including pesticide residues, microbial levels, mycotoxins, and elemental contaminants based on toxicological considerations and aligned with the existing USP procedures in the general tests and assays. We made several references to the ASTM recommendations and the AOAC SMPRs as appropriate, including the microbial load reduction, pesticide residues, and so on. Next slide, please. Additional recommendations are made regarding sampling, water activity, foreign organic matter, ash values, packaging, and storage. In here too, ASTM recommendations about the water activity are referenced, and the input from some of these organizations were very well appreciated by the USP expert panel. Next slide, please. Labeling is an important component that helps ensure that the patients and the healthcare professionals can assess whether the product is suitable for their particular needs. USP recommendations include naming the specific chemotypes, accurate description of the cannabinoids and terpenes. Next slide, please. And besides the cannabinoids, a recommendation is also to define whether article is subjected to a process to reduce a microbial load in cases where the product conforms to the limits for the inhaled use as defined in the USP General Chapter 1111. Next slide, please. So in summary, the publication of the Cannabis Expert Panel work in the Journal of Natural Products, available freely, provides recommendations from the Cannabis Panel regarding the quality attributes for the nomenclature identification, quantitative tests for the cannabinoids and terpenes, and limits of contaminants. The panel is continuing its work on cannabis extract and hemp extract. We also share our perspectives at the ASTM and the AOAC meetings and appreciate their contributions to the quality of the cannabis. It really takes a village to provide inputs towards public health in this area. Thank you very much. I pass it on to Scott Coates from AOAC.
Thank you, Nandu. Hello, everybody. This is Scott Coates. I'm the Senior Director for the Research Institute, and I'm also the lead for the Cannabis Analytical Science Program. Next slide, please. So we're a smaller version of ASTM and USP. We're sort of all in the same area. We're working on making, in our case, we're devoted to making validated methods and evaluated methods. As I said, we're a little bit smaller. In our sister organization, we've got about 40 staff and about 4,000 members. And we're chemists and microbiologists, and we are around the world. We've got 16 regional sections in the US, Europe, Asia, Africa, and South America. Next slide, please. So our background is in validating methods, and we've got a big book called The Official Methods of Analysis. And we did do a couple of cannabis methods in 2017, but we realized in 2018 that was too small an effort. We couldn't just be doing 1 or 2 method validations a year, that we really needed to step up our game. So we created the Cannabis Analytical Science Program that's dedicated to the cannabis analytical science. And what we did was we have a focus on cannabis, but we're using all of our existing programs, the Official Methods of Analysis, Performance Tested Method Program, which is our test kit certification program, our Standard Method Performance Requirements, which is a standard we judge our methods by, laboratory proficiency testing, publications, and meetings. Our objective with CASP is to facilitate a forum where the science of cannabis analysis is discussed with international experts. We facilitate the development and publication of cannabis and hemp-specific methods and standards, and we develop cannabis and hemp reference materials. I'm sorry, we don't develop them, we identify them for cannabis and hemp reference materials. We establish cannabis and hemp proficiency testing program that's in the work now. And we provide analytical laboratory management training. We have several courses on how to develop and what the requirements are for specific cannabis methods. And we are in the process of putting together cannabis-specific education and training programs. So this is how we are organized. We have an advisory panel who are composed of CASP members. Well, the advisory panel are the CASP members who are sponsoring this program. And then if you're interested in becoming active in our CASP program, just send an email to one of the contacts at the end of this presentation, and we can get you involved. So I'm AOAC staff and a couple of other staff members that are in the last slide. We also have a dedicated science advisor, Dr. Susan Dino. And then you will see we've got 5 different working groups currently working. First one is cannabinoids and consumables. That's Dr. Holly Johnson. We have contaminants, microbiology, training and education, and proficiency testing. So CASP, the things that we're working on, we developed standards. So I'm going to talk more about this than the other item because it's a limited amount of time, but we have what we call standard method performance requirements. We also have validated methods. I mentioned the performance tested method program for test kits and the official methods of analysis, which is our standard program for validated methods, and that's the big book. If you've ever seen AOAC compendium, about 4,000 methods in there. We are now launching a proficiency testing program. We're in the process of getting that organized. And as I mentioned, we also are in the process of developing validation training courses. I wanted to talk a little bit about what an SMPR is. So standard method performance requirements around AOAC, we call them SMPR. They document the community's analytical method needs. They're very detailed description of an analytical method, includes acceptance criteria, published as a standard, and it's unique to AOAC. We use these SMPRs as how we decide whether a method can become either performance tested methods or official methods of analysis. Next slide, please. They form the basis of acceptance and approval. They also provide guidance to method developers for development of new methods. So, and I'll show you an example of an SMPR, but they're quite specific, and they'll tell you exactly what we're looking, that AOAC is looking for in a method. And sometimes they advance the state of the art in a particular direction. Let's say we need more accuracy at the low end of THC so that we can do testing in hemp. That might not be methods that are generally used. Usually, hemp THC is the 20 to 30% range, and with hemp you got to be down in the 0.3%. Next slide. And so an SMPR has these components, and I'll just go real quickly through them. They have a purpose, applicability, analytical technique, definitions, performance requirements, well, I'll show you in a minute, system suitability, reference materials, if we can identify them, validation guidance, maximum time to results, and then tables. Next slide. So this is typically the method performance requirements that we would have for a quantitative method. We provide an analytical range, a limit of detection, a limit of quantitation, repeatability, which is take one sample and repeat the analysis of that sample on one instrument, one analyst on one day, and that gives you the repeatability, as opposed to reproducibility, which is a common sample sent to different laboratories with different analysts and potentially different equipment. And also we specify the recovery. And you can see in some cases, for example, with recovery, we have a range starting at 0.01 going to 5%. Sometimes at the lower ranges, we might have to allow for a little more variance, so the recovery might be a little larger. Next slide. For quantitative methods, in particular for microbiology, we will specify the probability of detection, we'll specify an acceptable minimum detection level, inclusivity, and exclusivity. Next slide, please. Here's a list of our published cannabis-focused SMPRs. I won't go through them, but you can see there's a pretty wide variety of SMPRs. And again, these are the standards that we use to judge methods and to identify what kinds of methods we need. And what we'll do is we'll develop the SMPR that has all the specifics. Then we'll do a call for methods and look for those methods that meet these requirements that are in the SMPR. Next slide. So the current SMPRs that are in process, meaning that there are at some point they haven't been adopted by AOAC yet, detection of STEC and cannabis products, determination of heavy metals in cannabis and cannabis-derived product, screening method for mycotoxins in cannabis, confirmation method for mycotoxins in cannabis, and then the hemp drying procedure. And I'll take a second here on the hemp drying procedure. So we adopted a method for measurement of cannabinoids, including THC in hemp, and that method was mentioned in the interim final rule that USDA put together for the hemp production program, hemp domestic production program. And as part of their interim rule, they're requiring that hemp be sent to the testing laboratory in its not in its regular form. So we're working with the community to try to come up with some consensus about how to dry the hemp. Next slide. And that's what I was just talking about. So we go next slide. Next topic for the CASP program, personal care products, veterinary products, terpenes, vitamin A acetate and vape products, listeria, total yeast, and molds. We're going to have a meeting of the advisory panel this Friday at 1 o'clock, I think it is. And we're going to set our agenda for the analytical work and topics that we want to work on for next year. We finish up with the topics that I just mentioned, and then we'll look at these and start these up. Next slide. These are the CASP advisory panel members. These are the folks and organizations who sponsor the work of the CASP program. So this is really pretty cool because this is a self-funded program and not reliant on any one organization and or not reliant on the federal government or any other government for that matter. These folks help us run this program and pay for getting the work done. Next slide, please. So these are the contacts. I'm on the top left. If you're interested in becoming involved with the CASP program, please contact any one of us and we'll be happy to get you started. You don't have to be a CASP member. You don't have to be an advisory panel member. You don't have to pay any dues to be a part of CASP. We usually have about 50 to 60 people on a call at any time when we have our working groups. And then the next slide, please. I'll turn it over to Robert. He's talk about the ASTM efforts on cannabis. Take it away, Robert.
Thank you so much, Scott. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Bob Morgan with ASTM International, and it is indeed an honor to be here with you today, representing the 900 industry stakeholders from 26 countries that make up ASTM Committee D37 on Cannabis. And I'd just like to start out by thanking the National Cannabis Industries Association for including ASTM in this webinar series and to participate along with prestigious organizations like AOAC and NSF. So I'll just start off a little bit about ASTM. Like the two other organizations that we heard from, ASTM has been around for a long time, over 120 years, and we're a private, not-for-profit standards development organizations. And currently, ASTM, the organization, consists of 148 technical committees that are responsible for the development of maintenance of over 12,000 standards. So across the board in ASTM, we have 32,000 members, and 8,000 of those members come from 135 different countries around the world. And over 5,000 of our standards are referenced in 75 countries as either global regulations or documents of importance for the particular industry. We're an accredited standards development body. We're accredited by ANSI here in the US, and in Canada, we're accredited by the Standards Council of Canada. And we're an international standards organization complying with the World Trade Organization's principles for consensus. So ASTM basically is involved with the development and delivery of information. And that information is in the form of standards, and standards play an important role in product quality and performance, as well as safety for the consumer and the environment. So ASTM standards are built on consensus by the technical committees, and it's an open and transparent process where everyone has an equal voice. And so the output of an ASTM technical committee is based on the complexion of the stakeholders that make up the committee. And as you'll see as we move forward, Committee D37 is a little bit unique from the organizations that we just heard from, in that we cover all aspects of the cannabis industry. So ASTM standards are developed voluntarily and used voluntarily until, of course, they're referenced by regulatory authorities, code groups, and laws around the world. And as you can see, well over 6,000 standards have been adopted as national standards outside of the US. Next, please. So ASTM, basically myself as a staff person, we are not involved in the technical conversations that take place with regard to shaping the content of standards. As a staff person, we provide the resources, and the organization provides the resources and infrastructure that consists of tools for the development of standards. Those tools consist of templates for the standards, an online balloting process, online collaboration, and all kinds of editorial support and promotional support for the output that the technical committee focuses on. So we provide this collaboration area, collaboration environment for industry experts to set the agendas, determine what will be the focus of the standards development activities, and provide a way for this transparent process to move forward with anyone being able to participate and contribute. ASTM is a bottom-up organization. The members set the agendas and drive the topics that are going to be pursued for standards development. Next slide. So again, as I mentioned, ASTM standards are developed voluntarily and used voluntarily. Of course, unless they are cited in a contract or become referenced in a code or regulation. There's some interesting US law that directs government agencies to rely on organizations like ASTM and AOAC and NSF to be the resource for developing the technical information so that they can be referenced in government regulations. And this is directed under Public Law 104-113. So as a result, tens of thousands of individuals and companies and agencies globally work within the ASTM community to develop these consensus standards. And hopefully, because our goal is to create a technical committee that reflects the marketplace, the end result we'd like to think has marketplace relevance. Next slide, please. So getting to Committee D37 on cannabis, after we received back in 2015 a letter from a cultivator inquiring about the possibility of creating an ASTM technical committee on cannabis, we spent the next 18 months or so doing our due diligence to interact with all different aspects of the cannabis industry. And the end result, 2 years later, formed in 2017, ASTM created, the stakeholders voted to create Technical Committee D37. And as you can see, it's a quite simple scope. It's the development and maintenance of standards for cannabis, its products and processes. And under the umbrella of Committee D37, you can see we have a subcommittee structure that addresses a variety of aspects of the cannabis industry. And this goes back to the point I made earlier, how we may different from the focus of the two previous organizations. You can see we have cultivation subcommittees, quality management, laboratory, all the way to things like security and transportation, personnel, training and credentialing, industrial and hemp, cannabis devices and home grow appliances in subcommittee 08, and of course terminology. So this is how our committee of at this point close to 900 stakeholders is broken down depending on their area of interest. Next slide. So in building a technical committee, it was important for us to create global partnerships, since the original group that voted to create Committee D37 decided that it was important to focus on global standards, as this topic is a global industry. And in doing so, we created relationships and MOUs with multiple organizations that you can see listed here. There's no need for me to read those organizations, but many of these organizations were instrumental in providing technical content that they have developed and have offered up for the members of Committee D37 to consider as they pursue their standards development goals. Next slide. So as far as output, the progress of Committee D37 thus far, we have 14 approved standards, and they go over 2 slides, but I thought I would mention the water activity standards that Committee D37 developed. These were the first 2 standards that came out of D37, and it's exciting that these standards were mentioned in the USP paper, and I know that the members are very excited and grateful that that reference has taken place. As you can see, the variety of topics that have come out in these resulting standards are a reflection of the diversity that exists on Committee D37. If you can go to the next slide, this again is another example of the output that Committee D37 has promulgated through the consensus process and received approval. I make notice, I call your attention to some of the security and transportation topics that have been developed in Subcommittee 05, as well as the processing standards that have come out of Subcommittee 04 that were, I guess, captured on the last slide. But again, this is a result of the members of Committee D37 setting the agendas, determining what they want to focus on and put their time in to shepherding these standards concepts through the ballot process. Next slide. So in addition to the 14 standards that have been approved, there are literally dozens of standards underway and in develop in the 9 different technical subcommittees. And some of the ones that are close to being approved are listed on this slide. And a couple of them are worth calling attention to. Not that one's more important than the other, but I'd like to call your attention to the one at the top, which seems to be a very critical standard for the industry, having a representative sample that laboratories can use in doing the various type of analysis that takes place in cannabis laboratories. And we're close to completion on this, have had a lot of good input from many different industry stakeholders, and we're hoping that receives approval soon. Another standard that's interesting, before we get to the laboratory ones, I wanted to mention the standards that are being worked on in Subcommittee 06 that deal with credentialing a cannabis professional. And this should be an interesting conversation, and I can tell you from the subcommittee meetings that were held virtually last week, there's a lot of opinions and input on this topic, and we're excited about the opportunities that may exist in addition to having a standard for this, having training programs as well as certificate programs for folks that would complete a training program on a particular cannabis vocation. So you saw the laboratory standards that were there. Many of those overlap some of our organizations that we heard from earlier, AOAC and USP. And the promulgation of these standards will be based on the motivation and efforts of the volunteers from the industry that are focusing their attention on those. Next slide. So in addition to standards development platform, ASTM also has programs dedicated to training, and those trainings are either e-learning platforms or live training platforms where an instructor would put on a program and provide a training opportunity. Currently underway in D37, training opportunities are underway in the importance of water activity, which we've heard from is such a critical piece of the cannabis equation. We have a training program underway for corrective action, CAPA, as it relates to the cannabis industry. And an exciting certification program is in development for cannabis cultivation centers, as well as the performance of products once it is on the shelves with regard to packaging and labeling, and how it performs with regard to water activity. So these are some programs that are in development that we're excited about, that support the great efforts of the committee members on Committee D37, and we're excited to have those move forward. So if any of you are interested in how you can get involved in this open and transparent forum for the development of standards impacting, hopefully impacting the cannabis industry, I certainly encourage you to reach out to me, and I can steer you to how you can get involved in ASTM. So thank you very much, and I greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. Thank you.
Thank you again to all of our panelists. So now we are going to answer some of the questions that you've all posted in the Q&A board. So I'm going to start with a question for Bob. Richard asked, are the ASTM D37 meetings on the web? Are they monthly?
Okay, thank you. Great question, Richard, and thank you for posting it. So ASTM technical committees, and D37 is one of those, typically holds two meetings a year, and they take place typically in January and June. And these are live gatherings where stakeholders are able to engage with each other and focus their time on working on standards and dealing with input that is received through the ballot process when a standard starts to get exposure to the rest of the stakeholders in the committee. In addition to these live meetings, task groups and smaller groups, subcommittees, have the opportunity to meet throughout the year virtually. And as you can imagine, our June meeting that was scheduled for Boston the live meeting was canceled, but the majority of the subcommittees chose to meet virtually on ASTM's WebEx platform, and we were happy to accommodate that. And I think if you speak to those members that were engaged in that virtual platform for meetings, that they would agree that these were successful meetings. So in between meetings, there are opportunities and for virtual meetings that will take place throughout the year, and then the live meetings will take place twice a year in January and June. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Bob. We have another question for you, actually. Carrie asked, have any of the D37 standards been adopted by reference in state regulations?
Great question. I'll answer that question in a different way. First of all, I'm not aware of any specific state regulatory bodies at this time where they have adopted a specific ASTM standard. I am aware of certain states where we are in conversations with regard to their cannabis programs and the utility of ASTM standards there. So I'm anticipating that the standards will eventually get some recognition and adopted by the state agencies. Something a little bit more exciting to report on, and I had the opportunity to participate in Jamaica's cannabis standardization launch last week. And in that launch, the Bureau of Standards Jamaica revealed that they have adopted 4 D37 standards into their cannabis standards program, and they are considering at this time 2 more of our approved standards for adoption into their program. So that's exciting just to see the global impact that D37 is having. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I'm going to turn to Nandu to answer a question that Darwin asked. For adult use cannabis, would the 3 chemotypes suggested in the article that was published recently by USP be applicable in that case?
Thank you, Elena. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. So the objective for the USP Cannabis Expert Panel work was to develop quality attributes for cannabis use for medical purposes. The basis for the THC, CBD, the intermediate varieties, the acceptance criteria were defined based on the information that we analyze for medical purposes. So we don't have the information on the relevance or applicability of the standards for recreational purposes.
Thank you, Nandu. So I don't see any more questions in the board, but I'm going to ask each of you to answer this one before we go on to final thoughts. So how can NCI members get involved with each of your organizations? We'll start with Scott. And Scott, you're muted right now if you're talking. Okay, oh, here we go, Scott.
Yep, sorry about that. I'm trying to do too many things at one time. Yeah, so the best way to get involved with the CASP organization is to contact any one of the folks that you saw on the last slide that I had, and let us know what of those topics that we're working on that you're interested in. And a great way to get started is to become a member of one of our working groups that are working on different topics, and then you become, we will, and this is a perfect time to get involved because we're just starting the next round of topics starting in August and September. So contact us, tell us what your interest is, and then we'll ask you, we'll provide several opportunities to work on a working group.
Thank you, Scott. We'll turn to Bob next for how to get involved with D37. I know you mentioned this in your presentation, but I think it's important to reiterate.
Thank you, Elena. So ASTM technical committees are open to any interested parties that would like to get involved. And you can simply go on to ASTM's website, www.astm.org, and click Get Involved, and find your way through the membership application process. Or you can simply send me an email and I can respond with specific instructions to help you navigate that process. ASTM, what I like to think one of the great things about ASTM is we try to minimize any obstacles for anyone to participate in ASTM. And so we purposely keep our membership dues very low at $75. And that results in having stakeholders being able to freely engage in the standards development process. So again, you can either move around on our website yourself, or you can send me an email, and I'll be glad to walk you through the instructions on how you can become a member of ASTM D37.
Thank you, Bob. And lastly, Nandu, is there any way that NCIA members can get involved or provide feedback to USP's expert panel on cannabis?
Most certainly, yes. We do encourage the NCIA members to participate in the public standard setting activities by providing comments on the proposed recommendations, by contributing the data on the diversity of the products which are available out there, providing scientifically valid analytical data, and by attending our workshops or the stakeholder forums or reading the e-newsletter. So there are a lot of ways by which you can connect with USP. I provided a link to our landing page. That's a great start, which includes our contact information, the public policy positions. A lot of information is in that landing page. So I encourage you to connect with that, or feel free to send me an email anytime. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nandu. So we do have actually one more question that came in from David from the GMP Collective, also a member of NCIA, and they work with organizations in the US and Canada to make sure that their practices are up to par and quality and safety. His question is, and any three of you could answer, can anyone speak to the value of following or adopting any of USP, ASTM, or AOAC standards or recommendations within their personal organization, regardless of whether it's required by their state regulations?
I can, this is Bob Morgan with ASTM. I can provide one angle to that answer. So as you heard me mention, you know, we have over 12,500 standards, and 7,500 of those are used or referenced by the regulatory community. And by the way, it's important to note that the regulatory community are stakeholders in the ASTM process. And the question with regard to state regulators using ASTM standards, many of those states regulators have representation on the committee and are helping to shape the content of the standards so they have applicability to their state's programs. But to answer the specific question, you know, I've been exposed to the concept of standard of care. And if, for example, there's some kind of an issue with liability and it's being litigated in the courts, the concept of standard of care comes up, and oftentimes the standard of care has been an ASTM standard that provided performance characteristics for, like, let's say a child's car seat or some other safety type situation, whether it may not be law, but the courts have referred to this having the person being aware of the standard of care for that topic. I'm not quite sure if that's answering your question, David, but I just thought I would share that perspective.
Thank you, Bob.
And this is Scott. I'll be very quick as I know we're ending. Same kind of an answer for the AOAC methods. If you're using an AOAC method and you have any kind of a dispute with a legal and a regulatory action, a standard method, an AOAC method, ASTM procedures are always going to stand up in court, as opposed to a method that's not been validated or procedures that have not been adopted by ASTM or USP.
Yeah, this is Nandu. I echo what Bob and Scott said. Ultimately, the measure is science. So a manufacturer may follow their own specifications, their own methods, and their own acceptance criteria, or they could adopt the recommendations coming from any of the organizations to provide transparent quality specifications so that they don't really need to invest time and effort to develop scientifically valid methods by themselves. It's really taking upon the onus on themselves if they were to do all over again. And knowing what we know, it's not an easy task. So there is all the more reason to adopt the public standards available in the public domain. These are the resources for the community. Thank you.
Great, thank you all for your final thoughts. That was a really good way to end our presentation. Now I'm going to kick it back over to Brian.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you as always, Elena, for rocking the moderation position on this fantastic session. Thank you to all of our panelists, Nandu, Scott, and Robert, for presenting such a fantastic edition of our NCIA Committee Insights series today. Why don't we give our panelists a big virtual round of applause? I always love asking this of our audience. If you enjoyed today's session, why don't you raise your hand in the audience poll so they can see this fill the screen? Awesome. Fantastic. So really appreciate everyone's time and participation today. As always, we're going to conclude the session with a teaser and some upcoming announcements for NCIA activities that you should be on the lookout for. We're not slowing down anytime soon and hope you'll continue with our engagement with our online educational offerings by joining us for the next 2 upcoming editions in our always expanding Industry Essentials educational webinar series. Our members-only fireside chat series is quickly becoming the premier place for NCIA members to interact with elected officials, congressional champions for cannabis reform, and leaders in the public policy realm. In last month's episode, our government relations team were joined by Congressman Ed Perlmutter for a discussion around the Safe Banking Act. And this month, you'll have the opportunity to sit in with Mike and Michelle as they're joined by John Hudak of the Brookings Institute to discuss what this November will mean for the future of cannabis industry for years to come. During this webinar, they'll examine key congressional races, review how the changing makeup of Congress may shift opinions about marijuana, and most importantly, chat about what these organizations are researching and writing about next. Please note, this is an exclusive session only open to current NCIA members. So if you are one of the non-members joining today, please do consider joining following this webinar to get exclusive access to our premier government relations facing educational content. And following that, on August 5th, we'll be presenting the 2nd edition of our new NCIA Service Solutions series of webinars, focusing on the new member benefit we just rolled out this past summer, NCIA Connect. NCIA Connect is an online community for NCIA members to engage in thoughtful discussion and learn from other cannabis industry professionals while enjoying exclusive access to important industry resources and members-only content. This webinar will include a guided walkthrough of some of the key features of the platform from members of NCIA's marketing team, and you'll have the opportunity to learn about this new member benefit and find out how it can positively impact your business with fellow NCIA members. As with today's session, this webinar is free for both NCIA members as well as non-members to attend. So if you haven't already, head to NCIA's website to sign up today and invite as many of your colleagues who might be interested in joining as well. And last but not least, I would like to formally invite all of our NCIA members in attendance to attend the 2nd virtual tour of our brand new Cannabis Caucus Cyber event series coming later this fall. Starting again in September, over the final 3 weeks of the month, we're bringing our beloved member networking and educational event back with a focus on the Southwest, Midwest, and Northeast regions. I'd love to get a show of hands among the audience. Who here attended the Cannabis Caucus Cyber events this past June? If you did, why don't you raise your hand? Anybody? Yeah, perfect. Awesome. Thank you, Christopher and Lucas. As you all should know, these events are a digital reformat of our beloved member networking and educational event series. We hosted 6 of them across the month of June and engaged with nearly 1/4 of NCIA's membership base digitally. These events consist of exclusive access to industry insights delivered firsthand from national and regional leaders, followed by a live Q&A session via Zoom with audience members to provide the interaction that you expect when participating in an NCIA event. We then conclude the evening with this amazing happy half hour featuring an exclusive live musical performance for you, with plenty of curated opportunities to interact with your regional network across multiple different platforms. Throughout, we'll be showcasing some suggested strains alongside incredible do-it-yourself recipes for cannabis-infused appetizers, mocktails, and cocktails, while encouraging everyone to share their experience with the creation and the consumption process via social media. If you haven't yet, please stay on the lookout for the announcement of this within the NCIA Community Hub, and then head there to secure your spot. If you have any issues during the registration process, please don't hesitate to reach out to our team at events@thecannabisindustry.org. And then before turning it over to our end of event credit sequence, I do want to make one note. Right now, I know all of us are feeling the pinch from the lack of in-person exposure at events, NCIA primarily among those. So if you are looking for ways to associate yourself with a leader in education within the cannabis industry, that is NCIA and our educational content, I would highly suggest that you explore all of the digital marketing opportunities that we're currently making available to our members across these Industry Essentials webinars and all of our other social media and digital marketing platforms, including our website, our Twitter, Instagram, podcast, and much, much more. This is the best way as an NCIA member to take your support of NCIA to the next level. So I highly encourage that you reach out to our business development team to learn more about our incredibly low price sponsorships that offer an enormous amount of ROI. Special mention to the GMP Collective, who's the sponsor of today's webinar, to learn more and schedule a meeting to talk about how you can support NCIA's vital work. All right. And with that, thank you all so much for participating in another NCIA Industry Essentials educational webinar. A huge thank you to all of our panelists, our audience members, and the member businesses which make our work possible. I don't know about you, but when I was a little kid watching movies, I always loved watching that end of movie credit sequence to see the amazing amount of people that it took to bring together something like that production. So we're trying to incorporate that into these events. By ending these with a end of event credit sequence highlighting all of the NCIA member businesses which make our work possible and participated in today's session. So with that, we'll leave you with this 2-minute end of event credit sequence highlighting all the fantastic NCIA members which participated in today's session. If you're here, stick around, give us a little hand raise inside the audience pool when you see your member business up there. And if you're not one of the NCIA member businesses listed in this end of event credit sequence, please join today so that you can support our vital work and get free exposure at one of our premier digital platforms across the US. All right, and with that, please enjoy these audio stylings by our Colorado-based resident musician, KJ Lease. And thank you again. We'll see you next week.